Hello, hello. Welcome to the Aftershow. A brand spanking new series, Patreon exclusive, brought to you by Polite Conversations. This is where I'm hoping to get to know you a little better, dear patrons. This will be the place to come hang out for a casual chat. Let's talk about all things woking up and polite conversations and Twitter spaces and whatever else you'd like to discuss. More content, more conversations, more fun, and even more rationality. Hello, listeners. It's been a while since I've gotten a chance to do an after show. This one's been sitting in my editing queue since early November of last year, I think, just before the dreadful US election. I don't think either of us in this episode could have imagined the fast-paced destruction campaign that Elon and Trump would launch as soon as they were in power. But I think the conversation still holds up quite well. The right is certainly more horrifying now than it was pre-US election, but it was still horrifying then, so we generally knew if the Dems lost, things would be super fucked. Even though they were pretty awful under the Dems too. Part of the reason why we're in this mess today. The genocide, as we know, is supported across the political spectrum in the West, and as a result, Israel is still doing mass slaughter. So that, unfortunately, also hasn't changed since our discussion in November, despite the claims of there being a fragile ceasefire in place. They are also still pumping out atrocity propaganda and lies, like we discussed here, so they can ramp up for the new phase in their genocide. The media is still complicit in parroting their propaganda, so yeah, I think this conversation is very much still applicable today. But aside from discussing those things, this was quite a fascinating chat too, to hear about Bree's bizarre Birthright trip, and I've since encountered a few more stories like hers, that doing the Birthright trip actually radicalized people against Israel. It's definitely not an uncommon thing. We also chatted about Tinder and the IDW. I bet that's a combination you didn't expect to hear. That was kind of fun, so yeah, enjoy. The extended version of this episode is available via patreon.com/nicemangoes. So if you're not a patron, remember you can become one for as little as $1 a month. Or you can even purchase individual episodes now too. This is a very interesting conversation. You don't want to miss it. Welcome to another episode of the After Show. This is where I talk to the excellent patrons of Polite Conversations podcast. If you sign up via patreon.com/nicemangoes, you too could one day be a guest on here and get early access to full extended episodes and extra content and such. But yeah. So today I've got Bree here with me, who is a civil rights lawyer, an IDW or centrist watcher, or reactionary centrist watcher, and also a pretty good finder of unhinged clips on the internet. Hello, Bree. How's it going?
Not too bad, all things considered.
Right. Before we started recording, you were just telling me this story about your Birthright trip to Israel. So why don't we begin with that?
All right. So I think I probably was a pretty unusual Birthright participant in that I knew next to nothing about Israel. I had learned next to nothing about it, either growing up from my parents or in school, or it was an almost complete blank spot.
So you were raised secular, I take it?
I was raised secular, and honestly, it's only my father who is Jewish, and it's really only by ethnicity, in the sense that I think there are quite a few Jews who would say that they're raised secular, who didn't have a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, who really don't go to synagogue or anything like that, but who still very much consider their Jewishness a part of their identity. To me, it's very much like I'm also English, German, Swedish. It's kind of seeing it as anything more than that. In my particular case, I wasn't connected actually to any kind of like Jewish community, whether secular or religious. I was actually always a little bit jealous of that. I think like it seemed to me like I would say I had generally sort of like a positive impression of Jews compared to other religions, maybe because more of them were atheists, or just because I was surrounded by a lot of like kind of like conservative Christians and some Mormons in my public school system. And I ended up sort of being, I would end up at people's youth group events and things like that, and sort of like attempted conversions. So I had kind of like I had a sort of, I was very, very much kind of put off religion in that sense, but the sort of community of it was always something that I kind of felt like I was maybe missing out on. And I think at least my parents perhaps also gave me the impression that the Jews were not as maybe it's not as religious or that it meant less in that sense. I mean, there are certainly people who consider themselves like culturally Catholic, even if they're not that religious, or I think certainly culturally Muslim is something people will say sometimes. But I mean, like, I think my parents had a rabbi marry them, but he wasn't, like, they told him not to say anything about God, and they specifically sought out a rabbi because they thought he'd be cooler about not talking about God.
So they're atheists.
Like, yeah, they are. And in fact,
and they consciously like raised you without religion.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where they would find one. They both come from such a long line of just absence of religion that it's funny. I was trying to sort of understand various things about my family heritage, and my relatives on both sides have actually written books, helpfully. So it's really wild to read stuff by like a great grandparent or like the cousin of a great grandparent and get sort of like the historical perspective from that. But my dad's father, so on the Jewish side, he was the agent to Rudolph Valentino, who I guess was like the first silent film star.
Oh, wow.
So he wrote a book it's called My Life with Rudy, and it's about a guy who was a star, but I guess before...
Just to let you know, people will Google that, and then they will be able to figure out who you are.
One could do that. I mean, I'm not that worried about being anonymous.
Okay.
Like, angry leftists on Twitter say, white women are not going to be put into camps. Cool it, girls. It's not actually what I was worried about in a Trump presidency, but...
Yeah, I mean, he's just awful in so many ways that would affect everyone.
I mean, it's not usually me who's, I don't put myself in the category of like, Trump will personally go after me, which is why it can be a bit odd.
Well, reproductive rights and things like that, but...
Oh, I'm not saying that I'm unaffected.
Yeah.
For sure. But I live in Berkeley. I'm privileged, right? Like, I don't think I guess I suppose this is going to make me delete my Twitter account, isn't it?
Well, just be careful what you want to say. I mean, I won't publish the whole thing, but at least part of it will be published in the public feed. The rest of it will be on Patreon.
I'm not going to try to stay anonymous. I'm not worried about it. I'm willing to put my name on things. I mean, I've sued the Bohemian Grove. They're some of the most powerful men on earth, and they hate me more than anyone alive. So if I've survived that thus far, I think I can handle it. So my Jewish great grandfather the Hollywood agent, wrote a book, and I have never heard anyone gush so enthusiastically about Christmas in my entire life. So was this like, I mean, we're talking, when was he writing this? Like the 20s, probably? It's possible that this was like he was trying to cover for being Jewish. Like maybe it was like he wasn't out or something. I mean, that's possible. It's a mystery. All I know, my dad was told by his parents that he should always be proud of being Jewish and that it was nothing to be ashamed of, and that was about it. Mm-hmm. You know, like I think he, hearing about the various wars between Israel and Israel's ethnic cleansing of Palestine, which I'm sure my dad did not know about. But whatever news headlines he was getting in like 1967, I forget the years of all of the wars. But during those, his father, I mean, my dad was on the impression that, like, you know, they were on Team Jew, and the Arabs were bad somehow. So, like, I mean, some of that stuff seeped through. But other than that, I mean, that's only me talking to him about what he learned about it recently that I would even know that.
Like you talking to your dad?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I think I learned absolutely nothing about Israel.
What's your dad thinking nowadays?
So, my parents are kind of like, they're like MSNBC liberals, I guess. How I would describe them. I mean, they voted for Bernie, I think. Yeah, they caucused for Bernie in Washington State. I think both times. My mom's like a huge Rachel Maddow fan. I don't think there's, like I said, this sort of Jewish connection to the whole thing is very remote. I don't think my mom and dad have substantially different opinions, or that any of it feels particularly personal to them. I do think some of the sort of like anti-Semitism moral panic that happened, that was, I mean, mostly, I would go so far as to say that I think it's almost entirely just a fabrication.
Like with the college campuses and Claudine Gay.
Well, yeah, I don't see any evidence of some kind of particular problem with anti-Semitism on the left or on college campuses. I understand that
unless you're counting students saying from the river to the sea, well, then it's everywhere.
Sure. Like, I mean, if you want to just define it as, this is an issue that is particularly upsetting to me because I work in civil rights. So I'm familiar with the abuses of these, or potential abuses of, harassment and discrimination laws.
Right.
I am a plaintiff's lawyer, so I only sue employers. I never work for employers. And
nice.
And I play offense, right? So like I've never defended anyone for anything. And for the first time, reading about some of what's been happening, it's occurred to me that like my services might be needed defending people against bullshit accusations, which is just very odd from my perspective, because normally the system is actually really built to make it as difficult as possible for people to bring even the most valid, most documented, most egregious cases of discrimination or harassment. It's an uphill battle. I think there's a popular belief that at least some, maybe large percentage of the people who sue their employers for discrimination or harassment are trying to get away with something or exaggerating or whatnot. And while this is not to say that people don't or wouldn't try to do that, that some people wouldn't, they would. In fact, I've encountered people who have called me and tried to get me to take a case that I thought clearly wasn't valid, and they were just trying to sort of use well, can't we just say they were racist because I don't have a case essentially, and it's not of some. I'm not saying, oh, I'm so ethical that indeed I would never take a case like that, and I in fact tell people that I think it's wrong of them to suggest it, and that there are so many real horrifying cases of that I really wish people would not just attribute a motive that they have no evidence of an employer that maybe screwed them over in another area. But the reality is that I wouldn't have to be particularly ethical for those cases to never end up in court, because nobody would ever take a case that they couldn't prove, because like all of the financial incentives go against it. You're taking a large risk for an uncertain reward at a future date, and no one would take a case that doesn't seem entirely solid. And even if it is solid, you still might not want to take the case unless you think it's worth the trouble. And those calculations, they lead to rejecting a lot of clients that have perfectly legitimate cases. And that's, I think, true throughout my field. Mm-hmm. But with the possibly changing definitions of anti-Semitism under federal law, possibly state law,
where they're trying to conflate like anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, right?
Right. So the International Holocaust Remembrance Association. God, I have to cringe when I say the names of these. Like,
I know. It's hard, awful to realize that an association set up to remember something so horrific and like just a very serious crime, to water it down in this manner. It's the whole conversation around anti-Semitism has just become really like upsetting. I'm not Jewish, but like as someone who cares about all forms of bigotry, it is horrifying to see day after day, like, articles that say reporting on the number of babies that Israel has murdered is anti-Semitic. And you're just like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? When actually, because of Israel's atrocities, I'm sure there's an impact, like a real impact on anti-Semitism. And to obfuscate that by including from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, or, just like pro-Palestine demonstrations. It's really dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, it's just an absolutely insidious, just really wicked way to go to take to take any form of bigotry and use it as a weapon is really quite disgusting to me, in the sense that, I mean, it's the same way that I feel about like a false rape accusation, right? They're very rare like when it comes down to like, there are very few false reports, right? Like when it comes to like individual women talking about their own experiences, not something that the Israeli government created.
But it's so dangerous, right?
But it's such a horrible thing to do. Like it's just so like to me, it just strikes me as like the worst thing, because it's you're endangering and
like real victims of
vilifying, right? And to see it just abused on such a huge scale, while we have real Nazis still running around, and where many of the same people complaining about anti-Semitism are quite chummy with actual neo-Nazis, including a lot of Israel.
And they have no trouble like completely disregarding any anti-Semitism towards anti-Zionist Jews, or the Jewish students at these campus protests, like taking down their cultural things, and just awful. It's such a mess.
Right. I mean, some of them, there's different forms of Hezbollah, right? Like, so you have your sort of liberal posers of where they're sort of like using all of the social justice language and like
Yeah.
the sort of language of the left and repurposing it for defense of a fascist state. But then there's a sort of standard like right-wing Israeli, and I mean that's most of Israel. So, I mean they're huge Trump fans, right? Like more so than any other.
Like open fascist rhetoric.
Right, and they love Trump. Like when they talk about American politics, that's like it's. I don't think Americans understand that, even though of course what they're doing is obviously so much worse than just being MAGA or Trump supporters.
Right.
Although plenty of those people are. It's not surprising that they would back a state like Israel. But when they talk about how excited they are about Trump and like how he might become a dictator, it's quite alarming to listen to Israelis who are currently doing a genocide talk about how excited they are about what might be about to happen in American politics.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
It is really terrifying. And one of the things that they will often do, it's almost like they can't. I even would expect maybe some of like a figure like Sam Harris has to do something like this, or I don't know if he has. But when they're talking about anti-Semitism, they can't help but link it to anti-white racism, which is really something to. It's such a mask off moment because it's like you weren't ever talking about anti-Semitism. You were talking about anti-white racism. This was about you hating black and brown people, like,
which is not a thing, but yeah.
Right? No, anti-white. It's just a dog whistle. Like,
yeah.
Anti-white racism. It actually works a lot like the way anti-Semitism has been used lately, right?
Which is unfortunate because that is a very real thing.
Right. So, but like anti-white,
you can see how Douglas Murray is using like anti-Semitic. Douglas Murray, beloved by Viktor Orban, writing like Nazi apologetics after October 7th, Holocaust revisionism. Like Douglas Murray is trying to be like the judge of who's anti-Semitic and who's not. It's like, fuck off, man. You've been on white nationalist reading lists.
He's such a parody of a like. It's like if you said, "I want a modern colonialist,"
yes.
like I want somebody like peak colonialism. I want him to talk like the 1800s.
Yes.
Like, and Israel who's trying to be like, "Oh no, we're actually indigenous." How dare you? How dare you call us colonizers? Douglas Murray, oh my God, he's so brilliant. Douglas, have you heard Douglas? Like,
God.
They're like, it's crazy. I mean, they're in their. I watched their ICJ defense back in like January or something, and the colonial relics that they like wheeled out for this. It just felt like I couldn't stop laughing at them because it's like, okay, we've got an Australian accent and then a British accent and they're all wearing these wigs, which to me as an American just is already funny.
Yeah.
and it really feels like they're doing, like I'm watching a historical drama.
Yeah.
As there's like these people pretending that they're not colonial, but they worship these like colonial archetypes.
Yeah. Yeah, so tell me more about your Birthright trip.
Oh, yeah. So I was a freshman or a sophomore in college, and I came across an ad on like a bulletin board or in some like school newsletter or something. And I was like, wait, it was just like, you can go on a free trip to Israel if you're Jewish. Like, that's kind of all I had. And I actually thought at the time that I could, even without knowing really much about Israel, the name Birthright Israel sounds like some creepy right-wing shit to me.
Yeah.
So even despite not knowing really anything about the history or the conflict at all, at least when I first saw the ad, I still could tell that much was bad. I believe when I was signed up for the trip, but I hadn't gone yet, I signed up for a class on, I think it was called ethnic conflict, which is really, I think, probably the wrong name for a class like that, looking back. But it was a good class, and we read enough, or I started reading the syllabus that by the time I actually got to the trip, I had I knew kind of what Zionism was. I had started reading, like, I think The Iron Wall, or one of those books, and run across something about, like, purity of blood or blood quantum or just something horrifying.
Oh, God.
I think the original Zionists were really hardcore about the Nazis sounding shit, and as someone who is a very much impure, not 100%. I believe it even was talking about, like, how that was bad. Like, they shared a, like, Hitler-like view of they didn't use the Nuremberg word Mischling, which I just learned not that long ago. But actually, yeah, both the Nazis and the very early Zionists thought that, like, mixed, like, partial Jews were, like, especially bad somehow. like there was something about the mixture. I know that there are similar myths if you look at, like, other colonies about, like, mulattoes being, like, especially dangerous or wicked or something. Like, I think that's a common theme throughout.
Well, and that's not just, like, back in the day. Like, Isaac Herzog, who is the president of Israel.
Oh, the leftist Labor president?
Yeah. I mean, in 2018, he said something like, intermarriage is a plague. And, like, I'm not sure if he fully ever walked it back, because he did get backlash for that.
I mean, he would, like, it's one of those things where it's like, that's so ordinary in Israel itself, but
yeah,
but shocking to the rest of the world that there are moments like that where it's like they accidentally said it to the Western press.
Let it slip. Yeah, I think he was talking about like the intermarriage by American Jews, like, because it's more common, I guess, outside of Israel, and that he was saying is an actual plague.
Yeah, I mean,
just the fact that he's the leftist guy is really fucking just ridiculous.
I mean, he's not, like, his comments are. I mean, he said one of, like, some of the most shocking genocidal things, and I think, didn't he say there's no civilians or something like that in the first?
On.
Yeah.
So he said there's no such thing as an innocent civilian in Palestine. Like, I don't know how someone like that can be a respected politician on the world stage, but it seems like many of our Western countries are willing to overlook, like, overtly genocidal statements when it comes from Israelis. Just absurd. Okay, so you went to Israel, and you had an idea about the kinds of rhetoric and Zionism.
Yeah, so I thought I was just on blood quantum. Right. So I thought I was actually maybe pulling one over on the Zionists when I went on this trip, because I didn't know what their rules were. I didn't look them up.
So how do they make you prove that you're Jewish?
Well, this is all you had to. So they call you when you sign up, and it is free. Like, you don't have to pay for anything except, like, your, like, lunch money. I think is all that is. I spent so little while I was there that I mean, the BDS didn't exist yet, but I'm still very much glad that I went, in the sense that, like, it radicalized me against Israel. And Zionists really like to lord it over people that, like, they just don't understand. There's this, like, oh, if you went, if you saw, like, if you knew. There's just this, and it's like, or you don't even understand what Zion is. Like, there's just this, and I think they really effectively sort of use that to convince people that it's all so much more complicated than they realize. And the fact, I mean, like, I went on your damn propaganda trip. You're gonna tell me that I don't understand Zionism, but I I went on your. It drives me crazy when people attack Ta-Nehisi Coates for, oh, you were only there for 10 days. How do you know anything? Like, my favorite clip of him is actually him talking to Chris Hayes. where, I mean, Chris Hayes is not disrespectful to him in any way, but he's asking him, like, I'm sure he's doing it in the like most, what would you say to people who feel like you didn't get the other side of the story kind of thing. And his response is something like, look, I talked to the people, or it's almost exactly, I think this is what he said, because he went and his guides during the Israel part of his trip were former IDF soldiers in
the breaking the silence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he said, I went there, I talked to the people who it was done to. I talked to the people who did it. Are you saying I didn't talk to the right people who did it?
The people who still love the idea of doing it.
Exactly. Like and it is ridiculous, right? Because in no other atrocity, in no, would you expect that someone would need to do that to understand it, right? Like
can you imagine like having the bar that high for that level of atrocity in any other situation? Like even when it's not as bad as genocide and apartheid, like in Saudi Arabia, I hear that things have changed since I've moved. But when I was growing up, women were required to dress in a black cloak. Even like if the cloak was brightly colored, that would attract attention. So it had to be like black or dark. And apparently now you can get real creative with the abaya, and even on occasion not have an abaya, but I'm not entirely sure what it's like. But when I was there was morality police enforcing that like your headscarf doesn't slip and stuff like that. Do you think that you need even 10 days to see in that society that there's something wrong with the way women are treated?
I mean, if you were to do like the average discussion with Ta-Nehisi Coates about something like that, the interviewer would always be asking something like, did you really do enough talking to the morality police?
Yeah.
You only talk to the people who don't like getting physically abused for wearing something.
Right.
What about the people who do like it and support it? You didn't even get their side of the story.
I've actually heard those types of apologists. But yeah, I mean, it would be recognized immediately for the absurdity that it is, right? But it's only plausible when it's Israel.
Yeah, like it would actually be considered really offensive and unacceptable, I think, in most, for somebody to float that idea, right?
Yeah, in the mainstream, it would be completely ridiculed that you need to talk to fans of the morality police as well as, like, you know, people who are critical of it and don't like being controlled in this way.
Mm-hmm. I can verify that as someone who only met people who did it and were proud of it in Israel, right. I don't think his opinion would have changed if he had. If anything, he would be more horrified.
Right.
So perhaps the Zionists would argue that I didn't get the full experience. So I tried to choose. They have a bunch of different options, and I chose the one that sounded like the least religious or political. So it was called like Israel by Foot or something. And so it was like hiking themed. And I think they offer options like that because they do know that some of that stuff is sort of off-putting to some people. So I've heard stories of people going and like having, like actually seeing Netanyahu make a speech encouraging everybody. But my group didn't even go to watch any political speeches. And actually the fact that my group didn't go led to like the other most dramatic story of my trip, where I met a very zealous Zionist who was offended by my, looking back, extremely mild opinions at the time. But so I went on this trip having read a tiny bit, and the only requirements, so you sign up, somebody calls you, and they ask you 3 questions, which is how old are you? Because you have to be between the ages of 18 and 26. Have you ever been on a group-sponsored trip to Israel before? Because it's supposed to be somebody who hasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And the third is just, are you Jewish?
Mm-hmm.
No specificity required on that. Like, they don't ask many questions. It's literally, I think
I bet if I tried to sign up for it, I mean, I'm not between 18 and 26 anymore, but if I was, I bet immediately they would be like, your name sounds not right.
Of course. And it's one of these things where, so I thought that the rule would be the same as the rule for being religiously considered Jewish, which is your mother.
Right.
Anyone born of a Jewish mother, and that can continue, I guess, indefinitely. so even if you're like an eighth, but as long as it's like an unbroken maternal line, you're still Jewish.
Mm.
But the rule for birthright, I assume, is the same as the rule for Aliyah, which I only learned like last year, I think, which is all that is actually required is one Jewish grandparent on either side.
Oh, wow. Okay. And Aliyah is what? Migration to Israel?
Yes, it's where you cash in your fabricated birthright.
Right.
To steal some Palestinian land, sure.
Right.
So all this time, I had actually kind of thought that I was looking for the free trip. I thought the Zionists were, though I didn't know much, I immediately had a sense that they were up to no good. They sounded racist and right-wing and all of that. And I assumed that this would be a free trip where I don't know, I expected something like a timeshare presentation at some point. Like some kind of hard sell on something I would not be at all interested in, but would still be worth the trip. That actually didn't happen. But there were several things that were sort of traumatizing, starting the day that I left. So at El Al, I'd been on many flights before. And I mean, this was not long after 9/11. So like security was enhanced everywhere for sure. But questioning when you check in for your flight at the airline is never something that I would expect and had never happened to me before.
Right. It happens to us all the time, but yeah, go on.
Yeah. And it's like, this was I had transferred from the West Coast. So it was like, I'd been flying all night. It was like 5 a.m. or something like that. And I was also sick way pre-COVID. Keep in mind, I feel terrible about having flown in this awful state. So I was really taken aback when they started asking me. The first thing they said is, "Why are you going to Israel?" And I said, "Oh, I'm on a birthright trip," thinking, of course, that like they know what it is and should be fine, right? And he, in Israeli, I mean, everyone has an accent. They're all probably former IDF. And so the first guy, he doesn't accept, like, it wasn't enough to say I was on birthright. So his next question is like, yeah, but I said, why are you going to Israel?
Okay.
I'm like, because I wanted to go on this trip and heard about it. Yeah, but why did you want to go on the trip?
Oh, gosh.
And I said, well, it's like something like it's a free trip. What's not to like? And it's like, that's the only reason you want to go, because it's a free trip.
Oh, okay, so he's like making judgments on you as well. Now, like, that's ridiculous.
As a lawyer, looking back, I did such a bad job with these responses. The proper way to deal with somebody who's clearly trying to get a rise out of you like that is to stick to what you said, right? So I should have said, yep, that's it. Because what do you do with that, right? It's not illegal to want to go on this free trip.
Right, yeah.
But I got defensive. And so I started talking and saying, well, I mean, I've never even been to this region of the world. It sounds fascinating. I want to learn about my heritage. Not that it has anything to do with my heritage, but
right.
I might have said something like that. And I think I made the rather large mistake of saying, I'm taking a class on the Israeli-Palestine conflict next year, and it would be really nice to.
Oh no!
Yeah, huge mistake. It didn't really dawn on me until a long time later that it was. I mean, I said the word Palestine to an ex-IDF person. That would be enough. So he
short circuit.
He stops the questioning. He goes and gets somebody else who comes back and starts just yelling at me in Hebrew.
What?
And this guy is like, I swear, he's like 7 feet tall and looks extremely Aryan in the way. Like I couldn't get the Gestapo feeling out of my head. I mean, I even thought that very consciously at the time. I was like, it's bad to think Gestapo about Jews, right? Or what else am I supposed to think? Like, my only association with this kind of like bizarre situation is that, but it had a really strong feeling. So a 7 foot tall Gestapo looking guy speaks rapid fire Hebrew with me. And to the point where I have to say, I'm sorry, I don't speak Hebrew. And he stops. He's like, your parents didn't teach you Hebrew. I said, well, no, they don't know Hebrew. He's like, are both your parents Jewish? I said, no.
Oh my gosh.
I said, no. And I think I'd even said that on the phone to them, although I wasn't sure if the person on the phone had maybe just been really nice, because she just said, as long as you identify in any way as Jewish, that's fine. Like, it was very no problem. But at the airport, different story. Mm-hmm. And so I think I may even have lied and said it was my mom's side. I'm breaking down under questioning in a way that, looking back, I find very embarrassing, but it was the middle of the night and I was sick. And quite young.
And you've had like no practice.
No, yeah, I wasn't. It's just from now looking back, I'm like, what was I thinking? But I also had no idea that saying something like, I'm like wanting to learn about the Israel-Palestine conflict would be something that anybody would have a problem with. Like, I just didn't register that. Right. But so, a guy who's very disappointed in my parents for not teaching me Hebrew, like, he just wouldn't stop. He's like, why didn't your grandparents teach you Hebrew?
This is so ridiculous. Like, I mean, we get grilled at the airport and put in a separate room.
It gets worse. There's a separate room involved in this.
But they're not like judging our grandparents. It's very much like, you're connected to Saudi Arabia? Let me check this on the computer. Let me check this. Let me keep you in this room for half an hour and then check this again. And then cross-question you about where you're going again and again and again. But it's never like, well, why didn't your parents, like...
It was so weird. I was starting to think, like, I haven't slept in forever, like... Maybe, like, is this even really happening? It started to feel like a dream sequence at a certain point because it was so weird. And it's, like, just recently hearing Ta-Nehisi Coates, well, I read his book, but it's also in his interviews with Democracy Now! He talks about this, like, questioning to whether he can walk down a street in Hebron. And they're asking him, like, what was your parents' religion? What was your grandparents' religion? So I think and it's so familiar to this particular conversation. Like, it was just like it. That I'm like, they're trained in this, like, parents than do grandparents. Like,
right.
It's like they're reading from the same script 20 years later. And again, I'm like, I don't, my grandparents didn't speak Hebrew either. And like, you don't speak any Hebrew? You can't say one word in Hebrew? And I said, Hey, Shin, Gimel, no. These are, and he is silent for a moment, and he's like, those are letters. They are in fact letters. They are on the dreidel, and that was the only Jewish holiday that I occasionally celebrated as a kid. And Christmas had just happened. This is like right after New Year's that I'm going on this trip, so it was fresh in my mind. And you would have thought I could have mustered like a shalom, maybe. But no, I gave him letters thinking that they were words. And at that point, he marks my bags like with these like hot pink X's for like, and then walks away and takes my passport. They leave me to wait for like 2 hours without my passport. And
This is absurd.
There's a woman, yeah, like, and nobody's, like, they're not with me, but I also, like, I can't go to my flight. I don't have my passport or my stuff.
And it's not like you look like Arab or South Asian or anything.
No, I look white, and it wouldn't...
Not that that's justified, just to be clear to anyone listening, obviously.
I don't think people... I don't think the fact that I'm half Jewish would surprise anyone, per se, but I also don't think it's, like... I don't think I'm somebody that's, like, instantly read as Jewish. Like, I think some people probably would be. Ironically, not a lot of the people who are saying, "Would you hide me?" these days. Somehow that seems to be like the province of, oh, I had no idea they were Jewish.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, like it. But no, nor do I think it's like hard to believe or anything like that. I'm not somebody who would read to them as suspicious from appearance in any way. I don't think. But there was a woman, like, tasked with essentially just guarding my stuff for a while, who I had time to sort of, like, I was starting to ask her questions, and I'm like, what's with all this questioning? Like, why are they asking me so much about my Judaism? Like, I thought anyone could go to Israel. Is that like a rule that says you have to be Jewish to go to Israel? Mm-hmm. Or speak Hebrew? And she kind of just shook her head and was like, no, anybody can go to Israel. And that this woman was, like, in a much more, like, a staff role that I doubt she was Jewish or Israeli or part of any of it, but wasn't allowed to comment. And there was just sort of an understanding of, like, you could tell she was kind of like, yeah, they're just fucking with you. Like, this is just for no reason. They after leaving me for all of this time, they, like, quietly are like, come with us and take me to, I kid you not, there's like a large tile in the floor that, like, they opened, and there's like a staircase under the floor with chains dangling from the ceiling of this, like, narrow staircase.
So you're being taken into a dungeon or something?
Pretty much. I was actually, like, it was sufficiently frightening that I think I would have refused, honestly. I think I'd been given enough, like, stranger danger, like, propaganda as a child that, like, they'll tell you it's security and they'll intimidate you and you should never, like, I think I would have turned around and run. But they were taking another guy down there as well that had also been flagged for additional security for whatever reason. And so I felt okay. And they x-rayed my shoes. That was all they did in this, like, secret. Why did they need to do a special x-ray of my shoe? I don't think there was any reason. I think it was all, like, theater, intimidation. Like, I don't know why they couldn't have done that to my shoes in the, like, above ground x-rays, or, like, it did concern me. I was like, what is this place for? What are you guys, like? They wouldn't let me get to my flight until the flight, like, had said that it was boarding. So I still thought that I was going to miss it, and they escorted me onto it. Like, I had an ex-IDF guy, like, on each arm practically taking me onto the plane, and that's how I met, like, the other like 40 people on my trip. It was like everybody turns and stares, and it was like after the plane was supposed to leave, they had held it for me and, like, guarded me onto the thing. So,
wow, what a start to your Birthright trip.
Yeah, it was like, hi, I'm Bree. I swear I'm not a terrorist. Cool.
Oh, but, like, you know, by today's standards, basically everyone who isn't supporting Israel's genocide is.
Oh, for sure. And later in the trip, I actually had there's a Bedouin tent experience that, as if this couldn't all get any more cringe, they also, you know, they dabble in some, like, pretendiganism, probably, I guess, is what, well, I guess the whole project is a pretendian project, but they do this sort of, like, this.
They have those in Saudi, but Who's doing them in Israel?
Well, Birthright takes you on a Bedouin tent.
No, I mean, like, who are the, like, are they, like, Palestinian citizens of Israel that are, like, supposed to immerse you in this?
I mean, I imagine they're probably actually Bedouin, but they're getting paid by Birthright to do these. I mean, it's a way to make, like, Bedouins have gotten royally screwed, like almost everyone, like every other community that was indigenous to Israel, but they're more comfortable with like Bedouin is what they like to talk about and highlight instead of Palestinian,
because those are, like, I guess, people that are just like
they're nomadic. They're nomadic herders. So it's like, which actually, like, most of them aren't anymore. Like the whole thing is, it's so silly. I mean, they take you on a camel ride, and like the guys leading you around are like they were talking on cell phones the whole time. Like, there was definitely a sense of like, we're doing this dumb shit thing for like the tourists, but they have you spend the night at a like glamping sort of situation. And I was at these events. There's more than one tour group. And my trip was full of racists for sure, but not anyone very religious. Like, the religious people don't choose the trip that I was on, it seems. So I didn't experience people like pressuring me to like respect it. Like, I don't know. The vibe of my group was, I think, not like many of the more like zealous messianic versions, I suppose. So I'm gathered at bonfire night, and a guy asked, he's like, so what did you think of Ariel Sharon's speech today? And I said, we didn't go. And he's like, you didn't go to the prime minister's speech? I'm like, no, my trip is like, it's not politically focused. And he's like, well, what do you think of Ariel Sharon?
Oh boy.
And I said something that I would find incredibly milquetoast centrist. Like, I said something like, I don't like a lot of his security policies. I mean, I knew that he was like at least a George W. Bush type in my mind, right? With Iraq breaking out, I knew this is something that people who were against the Iraq war were also against Sharon, and that he was doing he wanted to do horrible things to the Palestinians. I didn't say that. I said something like, I mean, I'm not a fan, don't like his security policies, don't like George W. Bush, or something like that. And the guy's like, you don't think the Palestinians, I don't think he said Palestinians, he probably said terrorists or something. It was one of these, like, do you want to just let our people die? Or like, yeah, I mean, just something really shocking, like to say to a comment like that. And I don't even think I said anything because I was so stunned. And he kind of just kept on. So he said that his next question was like, have you ever seen those pro-Palestinian rallies? Those pro-Palestinian marches? And I was like, yeah, I think I've seen them. I think there was one at my school, or no, I think maybe there was one at an Iraq war protest I went to. Have you participated? And I said no, which was true at the time. But he's like, but you sympathize. You're a sympathizer. You're a Palestinian whore. Like,
are you serious?
Yeah.
Like, he escalated that fast to calling you a whore?
Oh, it was crazy. It was so shocking. And
please subscribe via patreon.com/nicemangoes to access the extended episode. And we're done. Thank you for listening. And thank you, dear patrons, for making the Polite Conversations Aftershow possible. See you next time.